We have nothing to fear but Ebola itself. And this is Hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Is fear contagious? A teacher up in Maine gets sent home for 3 weeks because she dared fly to an educational convention down in Dallas. In Mississippi, scared parents yanked their children from school after hearing that the principal had traveled to Zambia in sub-Saharan Africa, thousands of miles away from the infected area. This is the fear stalking the elections 2 weeks from now.
Senator Hagan has failed the people of North Carolina and the nation by not securing our border. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got an Ebola outbreak. Until the CDC can convince me that we are able to intervene with anyone who represents a threat to the safety and security of this country, then we've got to prevent them from traveling here.
And I think we ought to have an immediate travel ban from the affected areas going into effect now. Not tomorrow, but now.
The Ebola epidemic, along with ISIS, shows you how we should really secure the border and not be granting amnesty.
I think it's naive to think that people aren't going to be walking through here who have those types of diseases and or other types of intent, criminal or terrorist, and yet we do nothing to secure our border. It's dangerous.
People walking through here, the southern border. These are all disconnects, but they all play on fear. Also tonight, it now appears that only an historic African-American vote can save Democratic control of the U.S. Senate in 2 weeks, one at least as strong as the one for President Obama's second term. Well, can they deliver on Election Day? Can the group long looked upon as the Democrats' infantry now be counted on to be the cavalry? First, to this Ebola danger. It's become the Republicans' #1 weapon of choice. Howard Fineman's editorial director of the Huffington Post. He's up in New York, and Eugene Robinson is a columnist for the Washington Post. Both are MSNBC political analysts. Howard, I want you to start here. This use of fear, it reminds me almost of the Cold War. In the Cold War, there really were communists over there, but the fact is, I guess there were some here, but the fact of the matter was this use of fear here. One victim in the United States. They somehow tie it together with, well, what was Scott Brown tying it together with? People walking around here, people crossing the border, ISIS, tying it all together into one big fat package of, my God, the world's coming to an end. We need a new party to run the thing.
Yeah, Chris,
it's just a strange thing.
Well, it's strange, but yet familiar in American political life and American political history. And I think the analogy to the Red Scare is right on point. There's just enough of a grain of truth in it all to allow the Republicans to run wild. They've always, at least certainly since the 60s, run on the idea of the other, of the outsider, of the stranger, of the person or force that's unnamed that you should fear. And the current vessel for that started with the border and immigration from the South, legal and otherwise. That didn't really fly with the American people or the Republican Party because the Republican Party's divided on it. Then they moved after the beheadings to ISIS, the Great Fear, even though that was in Syria and not in the United States. And now, of course, Ebola. And you put all three of them together, and fear, raw emotion, can, if allowed to be unanswered and unchecked, overrule the rational mind in American politics. And it's the challenge of the president and the Democrats in the last 2 weeks here, 2.5 weeks, to say, look, the Republicans have nothing to run on but fear. They have no program. They have only irrational fear. We have the answers. We have the way forward. And that's really going to frame these last 2.5 weeks until the Senate is decided, if it's decided on November 4th.
Gene, what is the connection between the Rio Grande River and the Atlantic Ocean? Why do they fear that? They know, look, people are reasonably concerned about a rush of immigrants. Any country would be. Yeah. A rush of unregulated immigration. And there's a law, it's a law. But how do they connect that with a few people? Well, there's one person that came in the country they know of from West Africa who lied to get here. So all these other things won't keep them out anyway, probably. But how do they connect Scott Brown talking about people walking through New Hampshire.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are they coming from? They're
Nobody is going to get Ebola, walk across the
Well, by
Texas
the way, New
border
Hampshire's pretty
and
far from
walk
Mexico.
to New Hampshire, right?
Yeah, I know.
That's never ever going to happen. And so, but Howard is right. It's the atmospherics. It's creating this sense of doom and foreboding and chaos, and so the particulars, if you look at them, they don't parse, right? They don't actually make sense as discrete things you ought to be scared of, but they were trying to create this atmosphere that you ought to be scared of it all, and you ought to be dissatisfied with whatever the Democrats are doing or not doing to protect us from this sort of
Does anybody think that the
inchoate
Republicans
fear.
would be more active in West Africa development and health standards? Does anybody believe they would have been more actively over there working to prevent that travesty
because
over there?
a lot of Republicans are still saying, stop the flights, unaware that there are no flights.
And
there are no
stop foreign
flights
aid.
from the affected countries directly to the United States.
They go to Belgium.
None. Right. Stop the flights from Europe.
Anyway, the fear factor is obviously going to play a role in this. We're looking at Tom Tillis down in North Carolina. We'll get to that in a minute, but this guy's just hyping it up. Anyway, in a new Politico poll, nearly 2/3 of likely voters in swing states say they feel the U.S. has lost control of major challenges. One reason could be the chorus coming from big names on the right saying the administration can't be trusted to handle Ebola. Now, watch this chorus.
If you were president and NIH or the CDC were saying, hey, this will only make it worse. A travel ban, a flight ban will only make it worse. What we have in place is better. You would overrule the doctors and the experts?
Their arguments, Candy, the doctors and the experts that are saying this are working for the administration and repeating the administration talking points. And their arguments don't make sense.
Look, this administration couldn't run the IRS right, and it apparently is not running the CDC right. And you ask yourself, what is it going to take to have a president who really focuses on the interests of the American people?
I'm feeling a little sick myself, but it's not Ebola. I'm just sick of a government that I'm paying for telling me not to worry and just trust them. I wish I could, but if they repeatedly lie to me, I just don't believe them anymore.
Howard, the malice in these comments, the malice of accusing people like Frieden and Fauci of guys who've spent their life fighting infectious diseases, that's what they do. They're not political. Accusing them of being flacks for Obama is dishonest. Unless you got a screw loose. And that guy, Ted Cruz, always makes me think he does. Where does he get the idea that these guys are flacking for Obama? I don't even know what their party labels are. I don't know Fauci. I don't even know what his politics are. What is this about that they would blame the president for writing the scripts of doctors? How would he know what to put in the scripts? And what would be his motivation for playing down the danger? What does it mean to keep saying politically correct? What do they mean by that?
Well, 2 points. First of all, the Republicans here, if you listen to what they're saying, they're actually advocating for more of a government role. They may not like what the president is doing, but they want government activism here, to which many Democrats would say, how dare you? You've been tearing down the authority and the reach of government, both here and around the world, for decades. Now you want the government to be an activist government? That's the first point. The second point is Ted Cruz is in his comments there about administration talking points about science, is the perfect example of the intellectual bankruptcy of parts of the Republican Party that dismiss the idea of science. They dismiss the idea of accepted facts. They live in their own world. They think the left lives in its own world, and never the twain shall meet. So even science has been ripped apart. In science, in consensus on experimentally verified scientific facts, the whole basis of the thinking of the last 300 years since the Enlightenment is being thrown out the window by Republicans in this case.
Is there anybody that doesn't know they're loving this? Let's talk about that. Loving this. Let me read a sentence. Scott Brown. I don't know the guy at all, but look at this. I think it's naive to think that people aren't going to be walking through here.
Walking through here.
But these people are strolling through. Now listen to this. Here, who have those types of diseases, those types of, there's only one we're talking about here. Those types of diseases and or other types of intent, criminal or terrorist. So there's just, be on the lookout for the boogeyman. He's coming through here. It might be Typhoid Mary with Ebola. It might be somebody carrying, you know, their cantaloupe legs carrying hauls of drugs or whatever in the country.
It could be ISIS.
And we do ISIS to secure our border. So the whole thing out is shut down this country. They're coming.
Yeah, again, it's the
that's what you do when you're 10 points behind.
Sort of an umbrella, you know, designation. You should be afraid of everything. Bad people are coming to get you, and the Democrats are going to allow it.
Haven't these people seen the Music Man recently?
You're right.
This is the Music Man. It's trouble in River City. Oh, we got trouble. Oh, we got trouble. But they at least should tell us what. Look, I think a reasonable person could debate this. But they don't want to debate it.
It is debatable. Tony Fauci said today, look, you can disagree. We can discuss whether or not there ought to be a travel ban. In our professional opinion, there shouldn't be one. You know, and so
they're getting that.
Present a paper,
yes, Howard.
right.
Yeah, Howard.
Can I mention race here?
You may.
Let's put the cards on the table here.
You mean the word Africa?
No, the brown people coming from the south, the Arab people coming from the east, the black people coming from Africa. Nobody's saying that in so many words. Nobody's saying it at all, but it's in the background of this whole discussion, and anybody who would deny that doesn't know how this country operates. It's not the only way this country operates. We're bigger than that in the end. But that's definitely a subtext of a lot of what's going on here. There's just no question about it, and I'll say it if other people won't.
It is the arrival of them.
Right.
Yeah,
Even though African Americans, big hint here, have been here before we got here.
Well, yeah, there is that.
I mean, a little surprise there.
Before the Mayflower.
I know.
But no, Howard is absolutely right. I mean, you know, diseased Africans, you know, we have to keep them out. And these, you know, murderous Arabs and these, you know, these brown Central Americans, we have to keep, you know.
People who come walking through here with those kinds of diseases.
And we don't want them walking through here.
Anyway, there's a difference between justifiable fear, as we've been trying to say here, and hysteria. In the past few days, we've seen a couple of examples that verge into the latter, hysteria. Let's watch.
School district officials on Wednesday sent this letter home to parents of students who attend Strong School, where the suspended staff member teaches school. She traveled to Dallas earlier this week, representing Maine at a national conference. Parents voiced their fears about the possibility that the teacher could have been infected by the deadly virus. Following the meeting, the teacher, who has not been identified, was required to take a 21-day paid leave of absence.
Many parents took their kids out of school today, all because a middle school principal just got back from Africa.
There was a real sense of panic outside Hazelhurst Middle School. Principal Lee Wannick just returned from his brother's funeral in Zambia, far from the Ebola hotspot countries on the other side of Africa.
That's about 2,500 miles. We did the map today on the ground.
It's a long, long way.
It's as much as we are from them, practically.
Exactly.
I don't know. This is hysteria, and I think we have Professor Harold Hill out here. Yeah, so we got troubles in River City.
They don't teach
and you know why they're doing it?
anymore,
You know why they're doing it? Because there's an election in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that is it. This isn't a reasonable discussion of what's good public health. It's an attempt to scare people into the voting booth to vote R, because that's the vote for fear. Thank you, Howard Fineman. Thank you, Eugene Robinson. And you're on to something, Howard. Coming up, Black Power. I use that loosely. The Democrats' only hope to hold the White House Senate, it seems, is to have an extraordinary turnout by African Americans this November, equal to that of 2008 or 2012, when President Obama was actually on the ballot himself. Can they deliver on Election Day? As I said, the infantry is being asked to be the cavalry this time. Save the day. This is Hardball, the place for politics.
You are watching MSNBC International. Lock Up, weekend evenings on MSNBC.
Coming out here to Mount Rushmore, it reminds you that there are big issues at stake. Issues of equality, issues of the pursuit of happiness, issues of freedom, and this country standing for something. These guys were all looking forward to what they wanted to build in this country, every one of them. And this place reminds you of that. That it's not just about petty arguments over tax and environmental regulations, but it's about what kind of country you want to live in.
Now with Alex Wagner, only on MSNBC. The Rachel Maddow Show. only on MSNBC.
We're going to get right back and talk about what I call black power. There's a big story out there now that the only way the Democrats can hold the U.S. Senate is if African Americans get out and vote the way they voted in 2012. This is an extraordinary leap they're going to have to make. They're going to have to jump up and catch something they've never caught. A midterm election as strong as a presidential election. But they have to do it, it's argued, if the Democrats are to hold the Senate. We'll be right back and talk about that hot button issue.